Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and night one of the 2025 NFL Draft is complete, and it was a heck of a night for the New York Giants. As we said on our draft party show that was live from MetLife Stadium before the first round, that you could find on our YouTube channel and all of our podcast channels, the Giants not only went with the best player on their board and arguably, maybe not even arguably, the best defensive player in the draft, could be considered the best player in the draft at number 3 with Abdul Carter. And then, as predicted, as expected, the Giants sitting at 34 were not going to leave anything to chance. They end up trading back into the back end of the first round, and they get their quarterback of the future, Jaxson Dart from Ole Miss. Sounds familiar for the New York Giants. 2004. They got a quarterback that seemed to work out okay for them. So if you consider the Giants' history, a little bit of history tonight, the last time the Giants took a pass rushing linebacker with this much hype, well, we know 1981 Lawrence Taylor. And then the last time they really took a quarterback, other than Daniel Jones, which at the time seemed to be a little bit of a panic move by Dave Gettleman, and we all know, I'm not here to rehash how that worked out. But Jaxson Dart certainly has his fans, and one of those fans is Brian Daboll, who sees traits in him. Now, Daboll did not mention Josh Allen, but there are some similarities, not so much the size, but the way they play for when Allen came out of Wyoming and Dart came out of Ole Miss. So the trade, the Giants end up sending 34, which was their second round pick. They end up sending their second third rounder, which was 99 overall, and that was the comp pick that they ended up getting for Xavier McKinney leaving. And then they end up trading a third round pick in the 2026 draft next year. To me, Joe Schoen played the back end of the first round about as well as he can play. Now, from what I've heard, checking around in the brief time, the Rams were sitting there. The Rams liked Jaxson Dart. And I think the Giants had to get ahead of the Rams in order to get Jaxson Dart. I think they also felt the pressure and the urgency of knowing that the Browns and the Saints, two teams coming into the draft, believed they needed to get a quarterback. They had yet to get a quarterback. The Browns, by making the deal that they made earlier in the night, they were sitting not only at 33, but they had 35, I think it is. So they have two of the top 4 picks at the top of the second round tomorrow night. And I think Shane waited it out. I think once the Pittsburgh Steelers passed on a quarterback, that's when the Giants went on the phone and started kind of putting out feelers. They end up getting the trade with the Texans. A lot of people thought 24, the Vikings, may have been a sweet spot, and the Giants pull the trigger on 25, and they get Jaxson Dart. Now, like I said, I believe the Rams traded out after the Giants jumped ahead of them. So that tells me that the Rams are sticking and picking and probably taking Jaxson Dart to replace Matthew Stafford eventually down the line. And isn't that a little bit of a twist of fate if that was the plan that the Rams had and the Giants end up taking the rookie quarterback that the Rams would have gotten to basically replace the guy that they didn't end up trading to the Giants back in February at the Combine, which is Matthew Stafford. So, look, we can break this down in a number of different ways. Just want to kind of give you, we'll have more tomorrow. Jaxson Dart and Abdul Carter should both be here in New Jersey, so we'll have stuff on them. They have played each other. There was actually a couple video clips of Jaxson Dart getting sacked by Abdul Carter. Look, Carter, it is what it is as far as who he is as a player. This defense, as I told you on the pre-draft podcast, I do not believe Kayvon Thibodeau is a trade chip. They are picking up this 50-year option, and I think they're going to give an opportunity to see what Shane Bowen and this defensive staff can do with Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Abdul Carter, with Javon Holland and Paulson Adebo on the back end, Bobby Okereke in the middle. And I think they're going to give this an opportunity to say, let's see, you can never have too many pass rushers. They were able to make the deal. I know a lot of you were reaching out to me saying if they have to put Thibodeau in the trade to sweeten the pot, that never materialized. And like I said, I know some of you hate giving up an asset for next year, but the fear was out there that this regime was going to compromise the future to get a quarterback in here. They did not compromise the future with this trade. This was a very good trade. They moved up 9 spots. Now, obviously, the player matters. Jaxson Dart has to become a good player, or else you've given away assets, and who knows where this goes. But you could just tell listening to Brian Daboll talk about Jaxson Dart, and I'm here to give credit that Connor Hughes and a couple other reporters at the beginning of the week started mentioning that this was the guy that Brian Daboll liked. Well, if you heard Daboll tonight, he certainly sounded like a guy who was very happy that he got his quarterback. And it's going to take time, and it's going to be a situation where, look, I think Russell Wilson, Daboll said he's going to start this season. I mean, we expected that. Jameis Winston will be the backup, and then Jaxson Dart will progress and develop behind him. And then we'll see what happens. If this team is in a rough spot in October, then maybe the Giants move to Jaxson Dart to give themselves kind of some leeway going into next season to prove to ownership that he's the guy. John Mara talks fondly and remembers fondly when they finally knew that Eli Manning was going to be their guy, and that was in the final game of the 2004 season. And he recalled coming down a set of stairs at the old Giants Stadium, and his father, Wellington Mara, looked to John, and I'm paraphrasing, but said, I think we got our guy. So John Mara remembers that. So I think, by the end of this season, either the Giants are a winning team and in contention for the playoffs, or they are a team that gives Jaxson Dart an opportunity to move forward. Now, things I like about Jaxson Dart. Look, I said this previously. There's going to be a lot of comparisons to Eli Manning because of Ole Miss, because Eli and Archie Manning both stay in touch with Jaxson Dart. The reality is Eli and Jaxson Dart's personalities could not be more different. Eli was stone cold. Tom Coughlin used to talk about Eli and how, you'd never see any emotion. Jaxson Dart is the opposite. Jaxson Dart is essentially Brian Daboll at quarterback. He's hot. He's fiery. He's on the field. He's pointing. He's getting in teammates' faces. And Daboll loves that at a quarterback. And you get that a little bit of Josh Allen in Buffalo. And I think Daboll, that's kind of where his personality didn't mix with Daniel Jones a little bit. He loved seeing a little bit of frustration from Daniel Jones, maybe a little bit of anger in the Pittsburgh game last year, if you recall, on that Monday night game when Daniel Jones was very frustrated that they screwed up the 2-point play. And Daboll said, I want to see that. I need to see that. And pulling teeth for Daniel Jones to show that kind of emotion. You're going to have to reel Jaxson Dart in a little bit. He's got some emotion. Now, it'll be very interesting to see as a rookie how he finds his way here. But I made sure I asked Joe Shane, because it was a point that he made. You need the type of personality to thrive in this city, to survive in this city. And I'll have more on that in a column that posts on Friday morning, a couple hours from now, actually. But it's just an interesting way to listen to them. I think Jaxson Dart is much more of an athlete than Shedeur Sanders is. And I think this is an interesting point, and it's an important point. And I've made it several times, including on our pre-draft show, is that when Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll say it's early in the process in February, it is early in their process. And the reality is, early in their process, because they did so much work on Shedeur Sanders, people just assumed that he was out front, and they liked Shedeur Sanders. But as Dane Brugler of The Athletic told me, this draft and this player in particular, Shedeur Sanders, who's still available going into the second round, the reality is that for some reason, you either had to love Shedeur Sanders as a prospect or hate him as a prospect. You couldn't just like Shedeur Sanders as a prospect. And I think the Giants liked Shedeur Sanders as a prospect. I think they just liked Jaxson Dart more. I think they probably liked Cam Ward a little bit more than Jaxson Dart. They made efforts to move up to the number 1 pick. But sometimes those things happen, and you have to take the players that you take, and you have, and you like. I like the fact that the Giants were aggressive. I know some of you wanted them to just sit at 34. Look, if you're going after a player that you think can be your franchise quarterback, and I know some of you say, well, why didn't they just take him at 3? Because they had who they thought was the best player on the board, and Abdul Carter. And that's why they didn't take Dart at 3. But they clearly liked Dart. They clearly wanted to do something, and they ended up getting it done. So I think a couple weeks ago, if we had talked about it and you had told me that the Giants come away with Abdul Carter and Jaxson Dart in the first round of the NFL draft, I think you put a grade on it and say it's an A. I think, I gave Abdul Carter an A+ for his grade. I mean, I just think it's a great pick. I think he will thrive here. I like the fact that he can play off of Burns and Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence, and I'm curious to see how he grows into a playmaker here. And then I like the fact that you've made a solid group the strength of your team. You now have your identity. Your identity is going to be getting after the opposing quarterback. The Giants have done pretty well with that. Now, I'm not putting this group up against that group yet. They've got a lot to prove. But I do think that, you have an opportunity here to have the defensive rookie of the year in the NFL with Abdul Carter. Everything they said physically checks out. Giants are fine with that. I'm sure they'll take him slow a little bit this spring, but he claims to be raring to go. Look, with Jaxson Dart, I think it'll be a very interesting thing to watch how he progresses this year. It's going to be interesting to follow. You have to remember, the only other rookie quarterback that I've covered since I've been on the beat, that's somebody that's going to be, clearly the heir apparent, that was Daniel Jones. And it took 2 games as a rookie, and he was on the field in Tampa. So I think this is probably a little different. I think Russell Wilson will play a little bit more, and then we'll see how that goes. So exhale. Abdul Carter, Jaxson Dart, both. I have Jaxson Dart. I had it as a B for the grade, just because I think there's a little bit uncertainty as to far as what they have and who he can become. But Brian Daboll is the head coach of the New York Giants going into year 4 because he can develop quarterbacks because of what he did with Josh Allen in Buffalo. And now he has a quarterback to develop. And I think it's a worthy shot. You take the swing. Giants will now have to wait a little bit. They pick 65th, which is the first pick of the 3rd round tomorrow night. There'll be some good players. I think you're going to be looking, I would think, if there's an interior defensive lineman on the board, I think you probably go in that direction. The running backs are still out there. I think you may go maybe a Caleb Johnson, maybe a Cam Scatterbo. But remember, the Giants go 65, and then they come right back with 104 at the start of the 4th round on Saturday. So it'll be very interesting to see how they play out. But I believe we're going to get both players tomorrow. I think we're going to end up getting Abdul Carter and Jaxson Dart here at the Giants facility tomorrow on Friday. So it's going to be another interesting day. I appreciate Paul Wood producing this late night reaction podcast. Again, thanks to Mike and Miguel earlier producing the pre-draft podcast. And that'll do it from here. So it was an all-in day, and we appreciate you guys being all in. We will be back on Friday. It is now Friday. And we'll have Jaxson Dart and Abdul Carter here in the building, and then we'll have the third round, provided the Giants don't try to move back up into the second with their third round pick, and maybe they move some other pieces around. So we'll see where it goes from there. So you got your quarterback, you got your pass rusher. The Giants have a very good start to a pivotal draft for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. So appreciate you being all in. We're all in too. It's good night from 1925 Giants Drive. Thanks to the Giants for letting me use this back office to be able to pump out this podcast. And thanks to you, the fans, for listening and for watching and staying with us and always being all in. We'll catch you tomorrow here from Giants Camp.